Everyone. We'll begin in just 1 minute. We're admitting everyone, but in the meantime, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. The chat will be an active space. Introduce also your company affiliations, where you're from. Amidst us are some graduate students and community members of the University of Washington's Communication Leadership Program. But we also have many members of different organizations joining us today. So welcome today to our second session of Comm Lead Reconnect. We'll start in 1 minute. Thank you all again for joining us today on this Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Of course, we have participants who are joining us from different corners of the world and the country. I am Ekin Yashin. I am the director of the Communication Leadership Graduate Program at University of Washington. I'm joined today by Hansen Hussein, who's the co-founder of our program, who will be facilitating today's session with us. Hi, Hansen.
Hello, Ekin. Nice to see you.
I'm particularly excited. I'm excited for all our content, but as we're trying to make sense of the transformed world we find ourselves in, today's topic is always relevant, but even more relevant today when we are facing so many novelties and issues and challenges in this moment in time. And as we also get ready to reunite in our workplaces and teams in some ways, right? Hansen, right before we had this conversation, Microsoft published their most recent report about their predictions. So it's even more timely what we're talking about today.
Yeah, it's timely, and as you say, again, it's real time. Things are changing before our eyes, and our featured guests today are going to really help shed some light in terms of where we're heading. As most of you joined us last week, where we were looking very specifically at how we recreate trust through design, storytelling, and content. And today we're looking at how we reunite those workplaces and teams through intentional leadership. Both are really reflective of the moment that we're in, accelerated and amplified by the last 12 months of global crisis and political upheaval and social reckoning. And now, as Ken mentioned with that Microsoft report, it's clear that we're moving very quickly to that next normal. So this week and today, we'll be focusing on this notion of leadership, both internally and externally, with our employees, our clients, constituents, customers, and stakeholders. Did you want to say anything else, Ken, before we get into introducing our guest?
No, I'll turn it over to introduce our guest, and then I'll do a quick run of the. Well, before we do that, why don't I go over today's learning objectives, and so that everyone is on board with that. Again, we want to remind that this is a learning event, and our intention is to create a learning space for all of you, where we make sense of how we reunite our teams and workplaces now and in the future, particularly with the current environment and current challenges in mind. So today we want to particularly hone in on how we can overcome challenges of uniting workplaces and teams through particularly intentional leadership practices through the transformative lens of the pandemic, but also very many instances of overt racism and racist violence that we're facing, whose effects are faced and felt both at work and beyond severely. We will also talk a little bit about internal communication practices that would allow us to engage and motivate our organization's constituents. We'll explore some emerging trends that perhaps our participants would like to share with us that they're thinking about. And then we'll also think about how to build a truly inclusive workplace moving forward, Uh, all organizations have a long way to get at that and to become truly inclusive. So these are our goals. Our questions to our guests will be very much to ensure that we fulfill these learning objectives. And at the end of the sessions, you will have 30 minutes in smaller groups also to discuss some of these elements to apply the learning of today to your own context, to your own work, to your own learning. Now I'll turn it over to Hanson to introduce today's speakers.
Thanks for that, Ken. I've been keeping an eye on the chat as well as all of our participants introduce themselves to each other. And it's just so nice to see the diversity of people who are joining us, from our alumni to current students to people who we don't know who are coming from all over the world. And we like to say that communication leadership isn't just a graduate program, but it is a learning community. And how we learn and the community that we convene is not just those who are students, who are graduates, but everyone who connects to how we're trying to figure this all out together. And so as part of that, this event is definitely trying to figure out what we're in together. And we've assembled a power trio of leaders who are on the front lines of these changes and trends. First, Lakita Williams, who is a culture strategist and coach who works with organizations and leaders to design, create, and lead innovative, purpose-filled workplaces. She's the founder of Co-Create Work, a consultancy that helps founders build their culture as they grow and scale. Lakita is a certified professional coach, which is awesome, a trained master's level social worker, and a former senior HR leader at Amazon. Her formal training in the social sciences and organizational development has supported her mission of redefining the future of work, which is very much something we're focused on right now. Diana Burkett-Rucka has navigated a complex number of issues across multiple industries and private, not-for-profit, and government sectors. She's presently the Vice President of Public Affairs and Sustainability for Alaska Airlines and the current chair of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, the board. Diana's passionate about creating momentum for positive change through, among other things, effective governance, internal employee alignment, and community engagement. Sage K. Alohilani Kiamno is an award-winning entrepreneur, speaker, and changemaker. She's the CEO and co-founder of The Future of Us, a platform dedicated to advancing women of color through community, culture, and career development. Sage was recognized as Seattle's most influential in 2019 and is also an honoree on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. She's a native Hawaiian who looks at the world with an indigenous lens with the hope of leaving a better world for generations to come. And as a father of two, I thank you for that very important work for my generations and everybody else. So with that, those are our three invited guests and our experts. And I'd like to pass it over to Kim to make that first introduction.
Of course. And just a quick note too, if you want to open up live captioning, we have a live captioner today with us who will be captioning the whole event. So I want to thank them. And I also want to take a moment to thank all our students and community members who made this event possible. Today, joined by us producing this event are a number of our graduate students. So I want to thank them for their amazing work. And I also want to encourage you all to share your insights and questions throughout the session on the chat. Just a quick reminder that participants today and throughout these three sessions, upon viewing the sessions and participating, and also later on filling out a questionnaire that we'll send, will be eligible for a University of Washington branded digital badge. So your learning will be recognized at the end as well. Today's learning is very much about reuniting our workplaces and teams. And we'll start the conversation with Lakita Williams. Lakita, I got connected through a very close friend of mine, Ruchika Tulshian, who works on inclusive leadership. When I was talking to her about our vision for today, she said, your vision and your work. And we talked about it. And then I acquainted myself with your amazing work of setting the next kind of imagination for leadership practices and enhancing leaders of today in multiple platforms. So we're going to ask all of you today to start with, in addition to all the questions we'll ask and all the questions that will come up from our community, how can we reunite our workplaces and teams through intentional leadership practices? Lakita, we would like to start with you. Please share with us your vision and your thoughts.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to be here and talk about the future of work and building inclusive workplaces. It's one of my absolute favorite things, and I'm super passionate about it, so I appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing from Diana and Sage as well. So I want to start off by just saying I believe in the transformative power that work has in our lives. And so I'm so excited about what we might learn here together, because to build workplaces of the future and to build truly inclusive workplaces, we're going to have to do that together. And so I remember my own experiences as I started to get into the workforce and the transformations that I had, both in sales and leadership and technology. So I think everyone is here to talk about the future of work, but I want to really anchor us in the shared understanding that work has a significant impact on us. I think this past year has shown us that, more than we may have realized, although for many of us, we've already known that from mental health outcomes that have been associated with work, from relationships and futuring that we've had in our communities as we build with work. So I believe the task ahead of us is to build workplaces that are better and more inclusive than ever before. And I would like to share what I call 5 components of inclusive culture. And any of these elements can be the basis of building intentional leadership practices, including organizations and company cultures built with intention. But I wanted to just briefly share each of these components, define them a bit, and then share some of the practices that our clients have implemented that I think highlight about where we might be going as we talk about building more inclusive and future-focused workplaces. So the first component is shared purpose. And so the way we define that is that shared purpose is clarity on why your business, organization, or community exists and how each individual has an impact in the work that we do. And so previously, we may not have been adding that point about each individual impact. I think the past year has shown, for anyone who didn't know or was not realizing, that all of us have such a huge impact on ultimately the outcomes in the work that we do. So when you do the shared purpose successfully, it'll sound like I understand as an employee how my work has impact. And if it's unsuccessful, I won't know how my individual work has impact. So we've seen our clients and really been partnering with our clients as we think about the future of not just what does our organization do overall, but how does each individual know and understand how they have an impact. So when we're talking about everything that has been happening from the social uprising to the pandemic, that's top of mind for all of us, we want to make sure that people are understanding their connection to each part of the work that we're doing and how they can take care of themselves as well as we're going through these times. So shared purpose extends from beyond just the output that we're doing for our clients and customers, but how we're taking care of employees and helping them to be connected to the work that we do as well. Our second component is working agreements, and these are ways of working we use in our partnership and as an organization. These principles make implicit or unspoken ways of working clear, and they improve alignment in how we work together. Sometimes these are categorized as values. We actually have been talking about agreements or principles. Previously, we would talk about values, and values come across typically as not active. So when we are reshaping and thinking about the future of work, how do we activate our agreements for working together? And how do we show up in partnership together? So our values shouldn't be something that's just external. It's about how do we partner and work together internally. When this is successful, we're clear on how we work together, not just why we work together. And we share accountability, and there's no different rules for different people. So I just want to give you really quickly an example of one of these working agreements that has been created with one of our clients. So we agree to take care. That's creating maximum impact for our clients by first taking care of ourselves and each other, invest in each other's potential interests and growth so everyone feels empowered, and make space a safe, flexible one for each of us to learn, stumble, and succeed. So how did this particular client implement further their working agreement of taking care during the pandemic? Besides things like time off, doing frequent check-ins, they actually created a practice around open conversations. And these conversations are curated, and the days and times are, announced ahead of time. And anyone in the team can bring together their concerns, questions, or to just process what is happening in the world. They made sure that there is a resource for these conversations to take place. So someone who would lead that, and someone can always call for one of these conversations to happen as well. So that's just, I think with each of the components, it's about how do you implement it within your culture or your community or your business, but it really is about intentional practices. So each of these components can be considered through that lens. The next one is inclusive systems, and that's creating systems and processes that are designed to support how we operate and to ensure consistency. And when we say inclusive systems, we want to take you in the end. So think about decision-making, meeting etiquette, hiring, project management. Imagine if, as things were unfolding, you had a workplace that was really intentional, about building inclusive systems. Then some of the harm that we've experienced may have been averted, but we've also seen a lot of companies showing up strongly to this. So one example of that would be a client's decision to remove performance management requirements and end-of-year reviews during this time, leading from humanity first. Our fourth component is autonomy and flexibility, and someone alluded to the Microsoft report, and I think it just highlights how critical this is for our culture. So this is about building a culture of flexibility and shared accountability. I have more control of when, where, how I work, and that we can create these types of spaces if we're intentional. The shared definition of what autonomy means within the work needs to be explained and shared among all of us. And an example of this would be a flexible work policy that put into words versus making an assumption that everyone knows what flexible work means. Different people, typically those who have more power, will take more autonomy and flexibility. So we really need to be intentional about defining that for others. And so our fifth and final one is about intentional connection. And that is about how we communicate and stay connected with each other, but also walking the journey of the employee experience. And that means setting up systems for measurement and formal check-in processes and thinking about how we stay connected in the working together. With this example, I think I heard the timer, so I got thrown off. Organization had the opportunity to avoid potential layoffs by receiving work share payments. But before they signed up to say this is something that we would do, where we would move our employees to halftime or something like that, I'm going to walk through that process by signing up myself. Through doing that, they received the payment 4 weeks later, and then they understood that this isn't something that we want to implement for our company and organization. So I'll say ultimately, the key thing here is about intention. And so if you ground in these 5 components, you can really be future focused and planned in how we interact and work together and have more inclusive workplaces. So I'll just close with a final quote by Adrienne Marie Brown, which is, if we begin to understand ourselves as practice ground for transformation, we can transform the world. So practice within our workplaces. I'll close out there.
That was really beautiful, Lakita, and so thoughtful and useful. I saw a couple of comments on the chat. Yes, humanity first, and love these thoughts about employee experience. I also like the example you shared where you counseled somebody learn stumble. The stumble really got me, and succeed. I think that's really fabulous. So thank you for kicking us off with that and for really setting the tone for the conversation and learning that we want to have. I'd like to now move to Diana, who I've known for a number of years. I've always been a great admirer of Diana's leadership, her ability to communicate. We both served on the board of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce for a number of years, and I'm just amazed by the transitions and journeys she's had, both from health communications, where she worked before, to being really one of the top executives at Alaska Airlines. And she was top of mind when we were planning this particular session, because I was thinking about Alaska, about what it means to our community, and also some of the really hard decisions the airline had to make given the impact of the pandemic and everything else. And so I invited Diana to participate. And Diana, as I kick it off to you, I just noted I got an email alert that 2 years ago I have a picture of us together on stage for the Edelman Trust Barometer event. So we clearly cross paths from time to time, and thank you for joining us today.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Hanson. That was a fun conversation. Well, I feel like I was taking some furious notes when Lakita was speaking, and I feel like I should have had that presentation and set of learnings before I went through the last year and talk about what I'm about to talk about. But you know, there's so many lessons for all of us, I think, over the last year, and we are humans, and therefore we evolve, and we are not perfect, and we will continue to learn. So thank you, Lakita, for that wisdom. So I'll talk to you a little bit about what we went through in the last year and some of the things that I learned. But one of the reasons I did the Trust Barometer panel with Hanson is I really admire that work, and I really admire the thinking about communications as such a powerful lever to build trust. But because you're inherently thinking about how do you communicate to an audience, and your audience is people, it all starts with people. And one of the reasons that I like to do the work for the chamber is because business is made up of people, and we sometimes tend to think about it as sort of these institutions, or but we're all just people trying to sort of navigate the world and play our own roles and figure out how to make progress together. So communicators play a really powerful role in making sure that we move forward successfully. So my biggest lesson from the last year was thinking about how to use communication and leadership, and really being pushed to use communication and my own leadership in new ways, and even some uncomfortable ways, or ways that would have been previously uncomfortable. But there's no forcing function like a crisis. It gives you courage and drive, and it definitely forces the question of sort of what's the worst that could happen. And it forces you to take risk, because in many cases there is no alternative. And so I think we and I personally evolved to a communication style, or a leadership style, that was more open, more frequent, and hopefully more inclusive. And I think we did make progress in that regard, although certainly have not arrived in any respect and have ongoing learnings there. So just to bring us back to a little over a year ago, back when we did things like sit, right next to Hanson and have a panel with a group of people in a room. We were flying 130,000 passengers a day. And February 29th was the day that there was the first death in Washington state, and Governor Inslee declared a state of emergency. And we opened our command center, our emergency command center, which we open frequently, or as rarely as possible, but only when there is an incident. And the command center was open for a very long time. The next day, and just sort of to give you a sense of the arc, we were flying 130,000 passengers a day before COVID, and went down to 4,000 or 5,000 passengers a day. That's significant of a decline, and are now coming back up. So we'd never really seen anything like that in our industry, except for right after 9/11, but this was on a sustained basis. But at the time of that first declaration of emergency, we really did not know what we were going to get into. And I think leaders and less often communicators, but leaders often want to wait until there are answers before communicating. And we all know as people, if you've ever sat on a delayed airplane, you want the captain to come on and tell you what's going on, even if they don't have an answer. If you're in a doctor's appointment, you want them to tell you something, even if they don't have the answers, because it is settling for us to have that connection. So the first thing that we did on Sunday, that first day, was hold a series of literally 5 hours back-to-back 1-hour calls with some physicians that were advising us from UW, and work group by work group, the flight attendants, the pilots, the maintenance technicians, the call center agents. and tried to answer questions about what was this disease, what was this virus, how did it work, and what did we know and what do we not know. And a lot of people dialed in. It was fairly unprecedented. And there were a lot of things that we didn't know. I mean, at the time we were saying, don't wear masks. We were saying cleaning's the most important. All the management employees went out and cleaned airplanes. And there's photos of us all on the airplane, cleaning airplanes without a mask on. And now, looking back, we kind of had that backwards. But just sort of that imperative to kind of get information out there. We started a series of webcasts. We did stumble, Lakita. The first webcast, we were so excited. We were going to have more people than ever before join a webcast, and we put it on a server that crashed. So we had to send an email saying we're going to pre-record this and then put it up on the website. And we got to know our partners in IT really, really well. We hadn't worked with them as closely before. But we kept doing those webcasts every 2 weeks. We moved them to every month. Now they're every 6 weeks, but that is a much more frequent cadence than we had before. And we would say what we know and what we don't know and what we're going to do next. And that was sort of the continued cadence. I started sending a daily email to all 23,000 employees, which was just sort of a recap. And it was interesting to me how many people would write back and just connect. In fact, there was a day that the email didn't go out. It got stuck in sort of the email queue until the next morning. And I had a few people write back and say, oh, I'm so glad you sent it. I was worried that you were about whether or not you were okay. But there was that connection point. And I wasn't actually sending information that you couldn't receive, that you couldn't get elsewhere. You could get it on our intranet, but I was sending it sort of with a personal email address behind it. And people said that they appreciated that. That eventually extended to our guests in terms of our blog, media, even trying a public webcast, but just trying to give people as much information as we could during a time of great uncertainty. And while at first we were focused on personal health and safety, what we found is that those practices helped us when we started to talk about things like racism and hate and violence and safety on a very different front. And really trying to listen and learn and create space, even in a virtual format like this, for hundreds of employees to come together over and over across the company to share things that they had experienced as the receivers of racism, and actually start to have some truth telling about some of that and some healing and some ability to move forward. So we're on a journey. There's some of these practices that I think we will keep. We worked together across teams. We were very transparent. We gave each other resources, and we definitely messed up and figured things out and tried to get better as we went. My now almost former boss, Brad Tilden, CEO, said recently, "Man, we really used to screw up these webcasts." And I thought, okay, well, it wasn't that bad, but we did get better at them. So I hope those are some useful things. I think partly the lesson there for me is, again, back to sort of thinking about continuous adaptation. I love the humanity first lesson from Lakita. I am definitely going to take that back. But communicators do play powerful roles. My team is thrilled that the company knows what we do after this crisis. And there were some silver linings, although I certainly wouldn't wish it upon ourselves again. But taking the best of this experience and carrying it forward is something that we will try to do. And if there's any members of my team on the line today, I just want to say thanks, because they were true heroes in working long hours and trying to support our guests and our employees through the crisis. So thank you all. And I will look forward to learning from Sage.
Thank you, Diana. And thank you for sharing that timeline too, about how it unfolds, right? For many of us, it was kind of a calendar event. It started in a day and we started marking particular things, doing certain things for the first time, as you shared, in different ways. And the role of communication you shared as well. But through it all also, I think a common thread that I've already started seeing is ensuring well-being through it all of everyone, through these practices, the role of communication and leadership in well-being of those that are in our workplaces and teams, and that intention and kind of sharing that consistently is really, really important. So I thank you for this really thorough and thoughtful share for us. Next up, we'll hear from Sage. Sage, I'm really excited for particularly our students, but all our community to get to interact with you. I've been very much inspired by your work in pay and opportunity gap and building that gap and creating novel opportunities for particularly women of color. And your advocacy and your work in that is an inspiration for many. So I want to turn it over to you. I would love to hear what you're thinking about our theme today, about how we can reunite and rethink work in this moment in time.
Amazing, thank you. And I think that our fellow speakers have really laid down the foundation. So thank you so much, Lakita, for putting the 5 components of an intentional leadership. So we know the definition of each component and how can we put that into practice. So thank you so much for doing that, Lakita. Diana, thank you so much for, as a veteran like yourself, how are you as a communication leader really driving a large corporation, and how your experiences through the pandemic has really led led the path, especially for an industry that has been significantly impacted. I'm a big fan of Alaska Airlines and everything that you do. So thank you so much. And your team, I've seen you all grow, and you are a staple within the Pacific Northwest. So thank you as a brand. So thank you so much for your leadership. And I'm going to flip on the flip side, everyone. I am a 29-year-old CEO, so from a startup industry. So this is something that I am really on the flip side, a small shop. Some of you may be really interested in working with startups, but the startup industry is a little bit different. For us, we're a little bit more agile. We have less resources, but we're a little bit more adaptive in the way that we could switch and really implement intentional leadership components within our team. So giving you a little context, last year, myself and my former business partner, our business model was really focused on in-person events. So we lost over 40% of our expected revenue in Q1. We were a startup by 2 women of color, first-time entrepreneur, and we were our backs were against the ropes here, and we had to act quickly. And we had a team of about 5 people, and we knew that we needed to act fast. And it was a really defining moment of, as a leader, what are you made of? How are you going to communicate not only to your team members, but to your community at large? As Diana said, it's like being able to communicate to your brand, your consumers, and that was a community of women of color. And who was number one, greatly affected and impacted by the pandemic. Women of color lost over 100,000 jobs last year, and it was a really big moment in time. But it was an opportunity, right? Even when you bring up a challenge, this is an opportunity to really show what leadership looks like, especially when you come from, as a young Indigenous leader as myself. And what on our end as a small startup, we also worked with over a dozen companies, which is usually tech companies that the suspected people within Seattle. So we really learned through our sponsors as well. And throughout the entire pandemic, we really learned that 83% of executives surveyed that that remote work had been successful for their organizations. So 83% have said that remote work has been successful for their teams, and including ourselves. Right now, employees are actually more productive than they are in the office. And that is something that has truly shifted the way that we think and see how we do work every day. So 83%. So we know that workplace flexibility, working remotely will definitely be a part of company culture, of corporate culture moving forward. And also a survey conducted by SHRM, 41% of workers are experiencing burnout and Zoom fatigue. If you are experiencing this and you're on this call right now, thank you so much for joining us. I understand how it can be. So knowing that employees and like myself, especially myself, experiencing Zoom fatigue and knowing where your workers at, they're actually increasing productivity, but also they're experiencing burnout like never before. So the things that I've implemented in terms of intentional leadership was leading by example. So leading by example, first off is being consistent and clear with communication to your teams. As Diana has said, she has emailed the entire company every Monday, right? With updates of what's going on. And that's what I've implemented myself, is that not only did I communicate every weekly with my team Mondays, but also to our community to see where things are at, and what is our response, and how can we still communicate when everyone is craving connection. People are creating direction, leadership. And so that's what we implemented, is like clear and consistent communication to our community and our team. Second would be taking time off. This was I think this is really for a lot of employees where they feel that, we have these benefits of taking time off, taking vacation, and people are wary because a lot of employees are apprehensive of losing their jobs. And they say, oh, if I take time off for myself, does that indicate to my manager that I'm lazy or I'm not, dedicated to my job? But as a leader, is to show your employees that these are some of the benefits that we provide. And this is what we stand for. So if you are a leader, is to show, take advantage and show your employees that, hey, I'm taking time off. It's okay to take time off, and leading by example through that. Especially if you're taking off like maternity leave also. So showing that your employees that it's okay to do that, and leading by example. Three for myself is to honoring people's personal time. As a leader, I have definitely implemented a time where I do not answer emails after 6 p.m. I do not take texts or phone calls, and that is consistent throughout since last March. And telling my employees that I can only contact you from this time, and everything else will be the morning next. So people and your employees and your team can understand, hey, these are the boundaries that you hold. We're not going to have you extend yourself afterwards. We understand that people have personal lives, families to take care of, etc. So leading by example, by honoring people's personal times, and not answering texts. But I know that also with the lens, everyone, that I'm a startup. So knowing that I'm afforded to do that, right? I'm afforded to have those boundaries, and lead by example to that. So I want everybody, it would be irresponsible for me to say that across the board. So I want to let everybody know it's because we have a small shop and I'm a startup. Second is consistently and taking and giving feedback. So really intentionally creating one-on-ones and an open door policy for your employees to check in, and really figuring out like what are some of the pain points, what are the struggles, what are they looking for, right? Like what are they looking for? Is it more time on projects? Is it more time to build community with one another, and consistently showing up for them? And I think really thinking about how can you create a trust? How can you create a form of team building? And it is the 101s. And so because we know that the pandemic has forced us to, our needs and wants are different every month, every week. Actually, things were changing every week, especially with the Black Lives Matter, and how can we support our communities? So consistently taking and giving feedback. For instance, there is a company called Remitly. It's a startup here in Seattle, Washington. They were finding out through surveys that their employees were actually struggling with paying their bills. Like some of them were struggling with paying their bills, and what they implemented and changed was that they actually paid their employees every week instead of bi-weekly. So people had upfront cash to pay off whatever bills or support their communities in when they wanted. So those are the kind of ways how companies have quickly responded to the needs and wants of their employees by these simple surveys and their feedback, and being able to do that. And also another company that we work with is PayPal. And now after a year and analyzing the productivity of their employees, now they're giving their employees every other Friday off. So Fridays, every other Friday, they're letting them, it's kind of like a break on a Friday where they can do something, whether they spend time with their families or what have you. So it's giving their employees every other day off. And again, the context of the companies is that they're tech companies, and tech companies were able to thrive during this time. So understanding that there's going to be companies who have more resources, to do these things and implement these things. So again, but if you have the resources to do so, that's how companies have been able to adapt and take feedback and implement something really quickly. So that's the second part of consistently taking and giving feedback. Last but not least is building community. I know if you watch The Office, you know, there's some corny like get-togethers and happy hours, like Michael Scott, right? So building community is much more than that, right? It's authentic relationships, intentionality. How do you make it fun? And that's a part of taking their feedback and taking your employees' feedback. Sometimes maybe they don't want to meet every Friday for a Zoom happy hour. Maybe they want to do it another way, right? So like ask your employees, how do they want to come together as a community? What do they want to talk about? So really taking into account how would they like to be gathering at this moment? Because we all know we've been on Zoom many of times. So figuring out creative ways to build community with one another is really important. And that transforms right into synergy, right? And productivity of each team. And so companies like ourselves, but also like a lot of tech companies have really mastered ways of how to build community with other employees. And it is sometimes Zoom happy hours, or it's playing a game, or being a part of an event that a company is, another organization is holding, giving career development or personal development opportunities to your employees is something that really helps as well. So if you don't want to do something that's company hosted, you can do something that your employees can also participate in something that an organization is hosting. And so building community, those are the different ways that I see that have been creative, but also effective and impactful. And now a lot of these companies, their employees are wanting to stay, you know, they're not moving from different jobs to jobs. So number one is leading by example, consistently taking and giving feedback, and 3, building community. And so those are the ways that I've done it. Just like Diana said, we also fully pivoted our company. We had everything virtually. We switched into a digital tech forward company. We made a lot of mistakes, but we also learned a lot. And we wouldn't have learned if we weren't forced to learn. So we learned a lot about hosting virtual events, you know, being more, I would say, inclusive, right? Having somebody who can, you know, be there and, you know, force people to like switch, right? And get the sense of adaptability. So that's the things that we've learned. And hopefully you can implement this for your own communities. And when you think about jobs moving forward.
Sage, thank you so much for that. Was both powerful and extremely useful. I love those 3 steps. You know, lead by example. You know, provide feedback and build community. And one of our participants says it's incredible that you're supporting personal time as a startup, because my experience in startups has been basically being told you have no personal time since you work in a startup. So thank you for setting those boundaries. I think that's really important, and also for sharing your candid experience at the beginning of this crisis and how you're able to adapt and find success. So that was really excellent and really helpful for our community as well. So with that, you know, Akin and I are going to engage the 3 of you in conversation and questions. But as we mentioned, we'd like to integrate Q&A from the chat rather than creating a separate Q&A section. And with that, I think we're going to go straight to a question that came in during the presentations. And this is from Joel, and it's for Diana. Diana, what are some of the crisis communications best practices you learned in the past year? And how would you think about maybe integrating some of those things moving forward, in terms of some things will remain for the crisis, but then some other things it sounds like you might have learned that will actually be helpful for you as you move forward when the crisis is over?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, maybe we redefine what crisis is. It doesn't mean that it has to be sort of that you just use these practices when it's a bad thing. But maybe they're sort of continual, or when there's a business announcement, or when there's a change, because some of it just does come back to change management. I got to cheat because I saw your question, so I wrote down a couple things. So one thing, I think the first thing is, and this is, you know, communicate. This is a group of communicators, so I'm not saying anything rocket science, but communicate fast and often, especially in today's world when information, whether true or false, can sort of go be everywhere on your phone, on your social streams, everything. If you don't get out there and connect with people with sort of your truth or whatever, or some connection, other places are going to fill the void. So one is communicate fast and often. The second one is say what you know, what you don't know, and what's next. And sort of if you always kind of follow that cadence, it helps kind of bring people's brains along. The third one is give space to listen, because I do think we tend to push information out, but too infrequently do we sort of create space to receive it, whether that's in chat boxes or comment fields or just listening sessions. And I think it is good to sort of make sure that leaders are talking to their teams, but also create more kind of cross-functional, cross-level of a company, especially for big companies, listening sessions. Particularly in a company like ours, where you've got back office employees and frontline folks going to work every day, you've just got really different realities, and actually bringing those folks together to listen to each other helps create some empathy as well. And then the last thing is, I think as communicators, we are trained to care a lot about words, but it isn't just about words. And we also have to think about sort of what are the actions, or what are the spaces that we create that are not sort of word dependent, that also are part of crisis response or part of change management. One of the examples in this case was we actually both pivoted our volunteerism to virtual, but we also did a big drive called the Million Meals Challenge, and we delivered food to food banks or shelters, literally from Hawaii to New York and sort of a bunch of places in between. And it was a way that we could engage and sort of do something. And so there was an engagement element of it, but also we're thinking about sort of what are the needs of the community, not just talking about what we're doing. So anyway, those would be sort of the four things that I would say: communicate fast and often, say what you know, don't know, and what's next, give space to listen, and think about the actions, not just the words.
I have, I would follow up, and just a question came in. Thank you, Gail, for your question. And I will ask this question to Lakita first. Gail asks us, can you share some ways that leaders can care for themselves to maintain their own energy and strength as leaders, working and collaborating with so many leaders? What are some kind of insights you share with them?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been a huge topic of conversation. One of the things, and so some of it is systems within the company or organization that they need to change. And some of the things can be more of just do it. So let me start with some of the just do it. One is reducing meeting fatigue. So pretty much almost every client that we work with, we've implemented no meeting Mondays. I also follow no meeting Mondays, and just having the amount of energy that brings back to you, even as the leader. So holding yourself accountable to that gives you space as well. Another thing that's happening that's more systemic that you have to solve for is that leaders are experiencing fatigue from making a lot of decisions, constantly being the one that folks need to come to. And so we need to make limitations to that. So I would advise any leader to first get a sense of what it is that's causing you to feel burnt out, overwhelmed, needing to create more space, and then let's solve for that specifically. So that will be different for each company, but typically it always has something to do with decision-making fatigue. So what we've done is had folks redesign, right, what's a decision matrix we can use? Is this a decision that I need to make, or do I need to provide space for more autonomy and flexibility for someone else to make that decision? A third item I'll add, I have like a million things, but I'll just do the third one last, which is about coaching and receiving support. I'm not saying that just because I'm a coach. I also have a coach, but a lot of times we hear about how helpful and beneficial therapy is, and I completely agree. And we can also match therapy with having someone that's a partner or coaching to help you think about the business. And if you can't have resources for coaching right now, then a mentor can help and provide that as well. So we have to get to the source of like what is causing us to need more space. That should be intentional, period. But I think the only thing that I'm trying to elevate there is that it's not just I need time off. we have to get to what is the root cause that is having like causing burnout or other items like that, and solve for that. So not just, you know, a few weeks off.
That's a great response. Thanks for that, Lakita. I'm curious. I won't ask this question of you, but you must have had your phone burning at the beginning of this crisis. Though I understand you're a leadership coach to the stars in our region, so I'm sure they were coming to you for all kinds of answers. So thanks for sharing some of that insight, especially around fatigue and everything else. And that actually leads us to the next question that we received, and this is for Sage, and it comes from our colleague Gretchen, about this idea of taking time off and being able to give yourself that permission. And Gretchen is wondering what strategies can we give people to help them take that time off? Not just worrying about the impressions of you're giving to your colleagues, but also, you know, what are you returning to because you're taking that time off? So it sounds like, I mean, I never really thought about taking time off as a strategy, but have you thought about that? Is there a strategic approach to taking time off, Sage?
Yeah, I mean, it's filling your cup, you know. Like Lakita said, I invested in an executive coach and a career coach as soon as the pandemic hit, because I needed a space to be coached, but also a space to be vulnerable, right? I think at that time you have a lot of pressure I mean, again, decision, you're the one that's communicating, making decisions, holding down the team, and you need that space to really fill up your cup. And a lot of the times I invested in a therapist, an executive coach, and a lot of them said like, hey, if you need the time, give yourself the grace and do it. And don't feel guilty about it. I think a lot of us already are highly productive human beings. And a lot of the times that you need to really take that chance and take that time for yourself. That's really important to me. And also the following question too, before Lakita's question that she received, is that I learned best in community. And so the way that I fill my cup is actually learning from others. And so what I would do is I would organize industry calls with other female founders within the same industry, so I can be vulnerable, so we can learn from each other, so we can get insights from their companies and what best practices that they're doing. Just like this panel, this discussion right now, is that how can I learn from other leaders who are in the same industry, and how can we improve together? Right, we're no longer competitors. We're working and collaborating so we can survive and just survive this pandemic. And so that's kind of how I filled my cup. I've given space for that. It was actually energizing for me instead of draining. So that's kind of how I decided to fill my cup, besides getting the 101 help that Lakita suggested to folks. But it is a big step to decide, hey, I would like to take some time off. But if you know that's the root of the problem, as Lakita said, if that's the root, is that you actually need space to come in full force, right? If you're feeling like the work is no longer fulfilling for me, or I know that I am burnt out, and you don't even want to get up in the morning, because sometimes that happens. You know, you have to take the time off, because people don't want to work with miserable people, right? You do not want to work with a negative Nancy. You do not want to work with folks that are going to like affect the team. So if you know that starts creeping up for you, take a time off. And I think people are more understanding now nowadays. And this is the time to do so. But so that's kind of what my decision making, the process of deciding whether to take time off or not. That's what I went through.
Sage, thanks for that. That's actually really amazing to think about reaching out to your peers to get support and ideas, especially in a time of crisis when there are no textbook answers. And it makes me wonder, Diana, specifically, obviously you were making things up as you went along and coming up with some great solutions, but were you also reaching out to industry peers to get some ideas about how you could respond to the crisis?
Definitely within the airline industry. And Lakita's, I think, has some thoughts to add here as well, which is great. But definitely within the airline industry, I actually felt also kind of like Sage that what I was craving was actually some connection with other women leaders. And so that's something that I tried to proactively seek out. And I think, you know, I didn't think about it as necessarily sort of space to be me or space to be vulnerable, or Sage, you were much more articulate than I was in my own head about it. But I think that's what I was looking for. There's sort of the best practices need, but then there's also just sort of the human need when you're kind of starting a time like the last year. Lakita, did you want to jump in?
Now, I think my comment was more, thank you, Diana and Sage, for that, the community piece. I actually took that as a note for myself. I was more about adding to this idea of taking time off in space and how we create that in organizations. And so just the one note I want to add for any leaders or anyone who has the authority to make the decisions about folks taking time off, what I'll say is take extraordinary action. So we are living in extraordinary times. And so the response needs to be to do something that is above and beyond. One of our clients actually decided, regardless of how much vacation time, and they're a smaller organization, I will say they're a small business, everyone would take 2 weeks off. So it would be planned in order. Your 2 weeks would be planned out. You would know who was covering for you and whatnot. And that way, I think someone mentioned, like, what about coming back to a mountain of work? We begin to share that work together, and we're building a new practice of how we can work together, so that if we all are experiencing taking 2 weeks off and coming back to more work, then we're more willing to say we need to change something about the system. So take extraordinary action.
Lakita, I really appreciate that. I think that's a really important reminder that we do not act like nothing has happened, right? This is a really, really extraordinary and unprecedented time from multiple fronts. So that's really, really important advice. In just a few minutes, we're going to transition into the breakout groups where all of our participants will get to apply their learning in conversation and see how this relates to all the wisdom you shared relates to them. But before we do that, I just wanted like a concept or a sentence or two, or maybe even a tweet size answer from all of you. There are, of course, we've been talking a lot about flexibility and the emerging hybrid platforms of work that are here to stay. What are some things that we should be thinking about? Something that you want everyone to think about to ensure that whatever we transition next is accessible and welcoming and inclusive to everyone in our organizations, as leaders, as people who work in those organizations. So how do we make that transition to more flexible and hybrid work permanently, more seamlessly for all of our community members? A few brief thoughts from each one of you. Maybe we can start with you, Diana, and then move on.
Although, Diana, I hope the pilots won't be assuming any kind of hybrid work anytime soon.
For sure.
Well, I actually was going to say, I think, honestly, we're a little bit different in this regard. We're an operating company. And while I'm working at home today, I went to the office almost every single day through this, because if our frontline people could go to work, I could go to work. And kind of to Sage's lead by example point. So we will be offering some flexibility, but I think it gets back to empathy, which is that thinking about not just sort of what's right for each individual. And I loved Lakita's individual impact, but also how does it serve the collective? And how do you think about some equity across the broader community of an employee group? So that's longer than a tweet, but that's what I'll leave you.
Thank you. Sage?
I think one of the best quotes that I kind of live by when I think of myself as a leader is like, leadership is not a title, it's a behavior, so live it. So I think all of us are, as individuals, are leaders. And so we have to live as leaders every day. And and that pretty much is the same thing as diversity, equity, inclusion, right? If you believe in diversity, equity, inclusion, you believe in equity, you have to live it every day. And so it's a behavior.
Thank you. Kita?
I feel like I'm always breaking the rules, but so just 2 things. One, systems. Your whole organization is a system. So get to the root cause. Anything you plan as a response should be a systemic response. And then just secondly, before you have any sort of organizational or team transformation, personal transformation is required. So personal transformation leads to greater transformation. And so just centering that in anything that you do.
Thank you. Today, there's so many takeaways, so many valuable lessons to be remembered. Today's conversation will echo in my ears, and I've learned so much today. And I will be taking so much of this learning to my own practice as well. So I want to thank the three of you for all your insights and your leadership in this conversation.
Yeah, we should transcribe this whole conversation into the next textbook of communication leadership. Sage and Diana and Lakita, that was incredible. I learned so much. And there's I really appreciate how candid the three of you were and how bold you've been as well. And I think these crises do require both, because otherwise we're not really attacking the root problems that we face. And that's where the leadership truly lies. So thank you for that honesty and for being so generous with your insights.
Hanson, it also turns out that being bold and candid is more fun. So that is a bonus and probably something we should keep going forward.
Permission to be more fun and more bold. I love that.
And this has been all, as our speakers, valuable speakers shared, this has been a learning moment too. So this is also a chance for us to how to learn from this moment in this conversation. So in just a minute, you're going to be divided into breakout groups, and there'll be a document shared about, and you can see it here too. In that document, you can see the discussion guide. You have about 30 minutes, and we also shared a timer, and we'll share it again. Make sure to open up the Google Doc before you go into your breakout groups, and I shared it again in the chat as well. But we are asking you again, in this small group discussion to think about particularly how you can apply what you learned today, a lesson, one or two from our conversation today, to your own context, to your own leadership, to your own work practice today and in the future. So in just 1 minute, bear with us. We will transition into breakout groups where you will be divided into groups with your peers, with others from our community and people that you'll meet today. We will reconvene here in half an hour to say goodbye. And so if you want to join us and say goodbye, you're welcome to. We'll just share very quickly what comes next for next week, the third session of this really valuable learning series. And for those who leave early, it will be a conversation with author Maya Birdsong, author of How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community, one of my favorite books of the year.
Mine too.
Exactly. We'll dive into some of the components today and continue our conversation next week as well. So we transition now. You'll get an invitation. Please join to the breakout group that you're invited to. And otherwise, we'll see you here in 30 minutes. You're also welcome to leave if you want. The conversation and the questions in the breakout group are very much like the ones we'll ask to get the badge. It's a free conversation and you can take notes. Thank you all.
Thank you.